kid and a fiend.
Don't stress that, cause it's not in your bloodstream. Your whole being comes from greatness, you remember. Jake's song got you caught in the storms of December. And brothers on the block packing nines like September. Change the situation.
I'm Sasha Nicole. And this is Amerikan Therapy, the definitive podcast on all things Black mental health. And today, of course, we always have some great guests. We have some great guests in studio. We have Dr. Krystal Stanley, who is a psychologist licensed in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, and New York. She received her doctorate from Penn State University, and she has called Washington, D.C. home for 10 years. She, along with her business partner, owns and manages Renew Psychological Services, LLC, a mental health practice that offices in Capitol Hill, Thomas Circle, and downtown Silver Spring. So they must be doing well, Capitol Hill and Thomas Circle.
She getting them coins.
In her free time, she enjoys practicing yoga, baking, photography, playing the ukulele, and introverting. Info about Renew can be found at www.renewpsych.com or also on Instagram or Twitter at RenewPsych. We also have Olu Burrell. Olu Burrell is an executive leadership coach, people strategy consultant, and copy crafter who works with individuals, teams, and organizations to guide them through the process of intentional story making. Olu holds a BA in English from the real HU, Howard University.
Oh, Lord. We go into both.
Right.
So
I heard it was Hampton. But anyway, MS in organization development from American University and a graduate certificate in comprehensive evidence-based coaching from Fielding Graduate University. He holds the professional certified coach designation from the International Coach Federation and is a newly minted practitioner of the Leadership Circle Profile 360 instrument from the Leadership Circle. I'm actually familiar with that. A native Washington, Olu continues to make DC his home, and his wife Farron and his two children, Solomon and Samara, who constantly outwit and amaze him. You can follow him on IG and Facebook at Olu Burrell Consulting. And then, of course, we always have our third co-host of the show. We have Dr. Tanya Royster, as always. Dr. Tanya Royster is a clinician, teacher, researcher, innovator, and legal consultant, media expert who keeps it real. She's worked with people of all ages in treatment in hospitals and outpatient clinics and in government teaching at the university level. As a former Annie E. Casey Fellow, Dr. Royster has a longstanding commitment to helping neighborhoods and communities, culturally competent care, services, reducing healthcare disparity, and expanding health equity. She's known for her compassionate, caring ability to translate information so that people can use it to make themselves better and their families and communities better. Dr. Royster graduated from Case Western Reserve University. She also, what did I just do? She graduated from Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine, completed her psychiatry residencies for adults and children and adolescents in New York City. She's also the mom to two amazing teenage girls. You can reach her at www.abetterworlddrt.com or at drT@abetterworlddrt.com.
Ooh,
Starr, what are we talking about today?
Okay, so today's show comes out of our own relationship. So we're going to talk about dealing with conflict in those relationships that are most important to you and being able to have like very difficult conversations. So are we ready?
We are ready.
We're ready.
Okay. And today for our audience, y'all can't, well, you'll see it on the video. So Sasha is in Ocean City because she just gave a dynamic presentation on contracts management, right? So she's balling, and they paid her to do it, y'all.
No, but let me tell y'all, they paid for me to come, and then when I saw the hotel,
you was like, what?
No wonder.
You're like, oh.
So
It was like jokes.
To say, I went down the street to the Hilton. I checked in there on my own accord. Now, obviously, that ate out of the budget that they paid me to speak, but
it's a start, man.
I think it was worth it. I had to get my star on and stay at a night.
It's like, I'm sorry, I cannot do this. I'm gonna go down the street.
How many nices?
Nice, and then we stay nice because this whole conversation started on underlying issues. As Dr. Royster, she was our moderator, or what is that called? Is that like what they call it in the legal world? You like when you mediator. But it was all over a text. Well, it wasn't all over text. I don't want to simplify. Get ready to get in trouble.
Right.
I feel it because I am an empath.
Here we go.
So I used the word nice, and we were having a conversation, and Sasha was asking me a very direct question, and I was like, just somewhere nice, and so underlying issues turned into like a huge blow up, and we had to have Dr. Royster get in between and to have us, hear each other. So that's where this show came from, because I think it's pretty common. And I know in my own personal life, like, a lot of times you just let shit go and then you never actually heal it. So then it's like persistent. So that's what we're talking about today. So what y'all think? What y'all think? So, I mean, I'll start with you, Krystal. What is that like? Where do you start? Where do you start? Because like we had to have that conversation because we're in business together.
Right.
But in many of our live, situations, we can just walk away or we can just ignore it. So like, where does that come from even?
The conflict, you mean, or the?
I mean, just even the nature of like not resolving things,
yeah.
not even addressing things.
Well, as I was thinking about this topic, the thing I was thinking about that I do with clients every day is we start with the self, right? Because these conflicts often come out of, I think of it like a game of Minesweeper. If you'll ever played Minesweeper.
Yes. I used to love that game.
Right. And so it's a good illustration where, and I was terrible at Minesweeper, but you hit a block and like maybe a whole bunch of blocks cleared. You didn't hit any mines, maybe you're not even close to any mines, right? Sometimes you play and you hit a block and you've hit a mine and you just don't know, right? And so within ourselves, we all have those mines, right? We have things that are trigger points for us, right? And sometimes we're aware of it, sometimes we're not, and it's important that we are aware of it.
Okay.
And certainly in a relationship, especially a close relationship, people step on those mines without knowing, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's exactly what happens. And so it's a little bit like, understanding yourself and what some of your trigger points are, and then understanding that you got triggered and how and why.
Okay.
Because it's easy to like lash out.
How do you do that? I would never. I mean, and I've been in therapy for years.
Sure.
Like I know some of them, but like, how do you even know? Like, oh, that's a trigger, and then the how and the why. Other than for those of our audience that may not be able to afford to go to a therapist.
Well, it's helpful to know like checking in with how you feel, right?
That's
Like
what I was about to
obviously,
say, yeah.
right, you've been triggered, and so that's important information.
Yeah.
And the thing I tell people in therapy is that, I mean, we've got so many that you just don't know about. You don't know until someone steps on it or until a situation comes up and you're like, that really bothered me.
Okay.
That's important to be aware of.
All right.
The
So
why.
you may not know what the trigger was, but you do know that you feel some type of way, right?
So that's called a trigger when you feel that like.
Well, the feeling is what you feel. Then the trigger is now you got to think back. How did I get here?
Okay.
Right, and that's what the trigger was that made you feel that way. So you have to you have to really be your own detective, but you have to be self-aware enough
Absolutely.
to know your own. Because sometimes we'll just deflect it on the other person.
That's the natural inclination is to like, well, you did this.
Yes.
And it's
I think
your
that's
fault.
all of us. Though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's natural. It's when we, I think trigger is a perfect word for it. We don't really realize where it comes from until it just pops out and bites us. And the key thing is to realize that, which we don't do because we're in protection mode, right? We throw up the shield, we throw up the, we're on offense, and we are offended, and so we go on offense, and we just we let people have it. And sometimes in that moment, because we're reacting and not responding, it becomes a bit of an issue for us because then we can really do some damage to our really close relationships.
So Olu, what do you feel like as a coach? And I'm familiar with the 360 where you're giving that feedback.
Yeah.
What do you feel like as a coach are the first steps that we should do, especially those of us who are even in leadership or interested in being leadership or just being the leader in how we facilitate relationships with other people?
Yeah.
What do you feel like are some of the tools or resources and things that we should start doing to better communicate with each other?
Oh man! So the first thing that I start off is I try to see everything through the lens of story making, as I said in my bio. So I start with like, what story am I telling myself right now, and where is that coming from? And we may not know when exactly the first touch point that triggered us comes from, but I think if we take the time to stop and sit with it, feel where it's going on in our body, where is it happening? Is it happening in my gut? Is it happening in my head? Like, what's going on? And then just we know what's true. What's true in the moment is that we're hurt.
Right.
And I think the other thing I like to use is an acronym called WAIT. And so that's, for me, it's what's also indelibly true. And when you are in a close relationship with someone, if you're saying, what's also indelibly true is if I know this person does not mean to hurt me, then should I really be giving all this energy to them? Or is this something that's really coming within me that I have to figure it out? And one of the things that I live by and also swear by, the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz,
Yes, Lord.
just I have to live that and walk in that every single day. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Be impeccable with your word and always do your best. And if you live in that space, it's hard for you to be drawn into those things. Like, okay, if I'm not going to take things personally, then I got to figure out what this is. And that's self-work. And so I think that's just being aware of that is where you start.
Oh my goodness! But and I love all this. I love 4 Agreements. And that's something at the start of me becoming a yogi and a meditation teacher came to me. But it's great in the world when you're dealing with people who get all of this talk and this languaging and triggers and all that wording, right? But when you're like having conversations and even beyond, like in a professional setting, because professional settings include real people, so after the meeting is done and you have to deal with the person that doesn't like you and you don't like at work, or you have to deal with a boss who is fearful of you because you pose a threat to them potentially. We're people, no matter the setting. Without both parties being aware of all of this knowledge, it sounds like good, but it's very hard to do when we're not both like, okay.
But it depends on your expectations, right?
Okay.
So if you are,
She gonna school me. Here we go with this bullshit. Here we go. I love Dr. Royster.
yeah, she does.
I do.
If you are focused on those 4 agreements, then it's really not important to you what the other person is doing or what they're aware of, or because you're really focused on how to really live your best life and be as present as you can and take responsibility for your own SHIT.
But you get hurt though, and then you want to be like, you gonna hurt me?
No, well, that's the part of learning and control, right? You don't get to decide how they react or how they behave or whether they live by the 4 agreements or not. Only thing you get to decide is how you're going to handle that situation.
It just gets harder.
It is very hard. It's hard to always be the grown up.
But that's the work.
That's the work.
That's the work. The work is all in you. That's the only thing.
Is there things that we can do, like our audience can do and read and learn to like grow this muscle? Or is it just suck it up?
No, it's definitely not suck it up.
No.
Definitely,
That would never work.
Definitely a muscle.
That would never work.
No.
No.
So can you guys share some tools? We talked about the 4 Agreements. That's a really good book to probably start with. Is there any other, like, in the moment when you feel triggered, like a way to pause and be like, okay, this is not, like, I need to not smack someone in the store or something?
Well, the first thing is to just be aware.
Yes.
Okay.
Right?
Okay,
Be
so
aware that you are a part of the equation. If we walk
Mm-hmm.
around all the time saying it's other people's fault, it's what somebody did to me, is right. So the first thing is to be aware that you're a part of the equation, then to accept responsibility for it.
Okay.
I agree.
I would say too, I love your story making conversation about being aware that, in these relationships, you have a filter, right? So you're filtering these interactions with people based on your own stuff, some of which you're aware of and not. And so I like this idea of taking some time to just pause and think about what you're feeling, right? If you can take some time to think about it before you react and say, well, what am I feeling? What's going on for me? What does this remind me of? What feelings am I feeling? So that if you do address it with the person, you can be clear about, I was feeling this. When this happened, I felt this way. Maybe you have an ask, could you do more of this, less of that? Maybe you have a boundary that you want to share.
Because, I don't think, I think we were, arguing for an hour before we're like, I'm hurt. You're hurt. Because it's like, you don't tell people you hurt me.
Right.
That's because you got your guard up, right?
Yes.
Like, you're trying not to get hurt again.
Well, and I think it's also because, in the workplace is one thing. It's a little bit easier to ignore people in the workplace, right? But when there are people that are close to you, you feel like they should know my landmines. Now, I don't know my landmines. Boom. But they should know.
You better know what you've been around each other.
And let me say something about that. And I can't take credit for this. A good friend of mine who's a coach, her name is Daphne Jefferson. And she says, you know what happens when you talk about shoulds? You start shoulding all over yourself. Because your shoulds will always get you. Well, you know, you should have known. And you're like, how?
Right.
Like, you never said it. But if you knew me, if you knew me, and it's like, now it's, I made you mad, and now it's like, I gotta prove that we're close.
We're not close. We're not
close if you don't, you know.
You don't really know me. That's true. That's true. So, Sasha, what say you? I see you over there taking notes.
Yeah, I think it was really tough because, you know, it's funny, like with what Olu just said. Starr and I think we both do it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Starr, but we already. No, I think we both sometimes come from a place where we're like, but you know me, right?
Yes.
And I know I definitely do that with her, or she does that with me. But then, you know, when we really thought about it, you know, our friendship has really evolved. And I think a lot of times people's relationships, especially friendships with whoever, evolve as well. So it's like, we don't know each other, actually.
Well, you evolve as a person.
Each other, but we don't know each other in the evolution that we've had. And this has been a new and different journey. And then we've also just, you know, we have been together now in a much more intimate setting than we ever have before in these past, 15 years that we've known each other. And so that has made it differently because now we're getting to know each other and what it's like to be around each other every week or sometimes multiple times per week. And that's different. I think different for the both of us because we both have those type of personalities where it's like, all right, I'm with you now. I'm like, get away from me. Like I need something.
Very much so.
You know, so
very much so.
I think, you know, it's just it's complicated. And I think for me, it was definitely frustrating because I feel like, wow, like why are we having conflict? Like, does this take away from our friendship? And so maybe speak to, you know, when people are in, a lot of times, again, I say relationships or friendships, because a friendship is a relationship. But when people are in relationships, when we start to have conflict, we start to question the validity of the relationship. So how, you know, let's say all of you on there on the board, how do we define that and not think of it as just because we're having conflict, one, this means that we shouldn't have a relationship, or two, you know, should I reevaluate the relationship?
Well, I'm gonna say you ain't really a friend if we ain't got an argument.
I was about to say,
like at 40, you not my friend if we haven't gotten into something serious.
That's right. If you don't have a conflict in a relationship, that means you're not being honest.
Yes.
And so then that means it's not an intimate relationship, right? So honesty, if you're being honest with someone, then you are going to at some point have conflict. And I mean, you could think about conflict if you think about a relationship as a flower, right? It's a fertilizer, if you will. If you put too much on it, you could kill it. But if you don't put any, you could kill it too. So fertilizer, conflict, it's important. It helps you grow. It helps you become closer. It's important, and it's going to happen if you're close enough, because that just means that person is inside of that intimate circle and has access to feelings that other people don't.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback that, I think about it as a certain level of emotional engagement. Because as we were saying earlier, you can be mad at a person at work and go home and it's not a big deal, right? Like you can ignore them, but you know, it's totally normal to have conflict in relationships.
But in women's relationships, like I have my close circle, and I think my best friend probably is the one who taught me this later in life. Like, we typically have friends that for like years, and like the whole thing is we've never had a problem with each other. And it's surface. Now I know that's like surface. But I think I was like 30 till I realized that, like, oh, you supposed to like have issues with people and like actually tell them what you feel.
Yeah.
So I mean, but for women, I don't know. Maybe I'm being sexist, but
no, I would guess. This is just my guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. But I would guess those are friendships where you don't see the people that often, and so when you're with them, it's all happy, fun, and even if they, ruffle your feathers, you just brush it off because you're only going to be together a couple of days. And you don't ever actually address it, move on. And it might actually be one of the reasons that you don't see them that much.
Or it's like, I don't know. For me, like at one point in my life, like in my 20s and my 30s, I had folks that, like, we hung out. We go out. And DC is like a go out town, right? Yeah. So we're going to go to this. We're going to go to CBC. We're going to do this event and that event. And that's my girl that I travel with, or that's my girl that I XYZ with. But it's still very surface. It's not like intimate.
It's compartmentalized.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's my girl. We go out on Thursdays and hit this, spot up. Versus like, I made my very, very closest friends. I may not see them, but like maybe once a year. But like, we have very deep conversations all the time, and like. I don't know. It's hard to explain. Like, I just recently gathered that, like, oh, like, if you're not that you should create an argument, but like that there's a level of authenticity that is not there. Like, I'm like, oh, that's just somebody I hang out with now. And my best friend told me that was something with a person who I hung out with, and she was like, that's not your friend, that's just somebody you go out with. And I was like, what? Girl, that's my girl. And then something happened. I was like, oh, you was right.
Well, I guess I'm going to wade into this. I didn't really speak with expertise around, interpersonal or intrapersonal women relationships.
Yeah.
You observe them.
What I will say.
He said, I will.
This caveat is I do think that when you think about where the risk is, right? If you're not taking or making risks, then I think that's a good gauge as to how deep your relationship really is. When you think about what happens if there's a crisis in your life, and if you had to think about 5 people who you needed to call, if they're not going to end up on that list, that does not mean that there's not value to that relationship. It just means it's not as deep as perhaps other relationships are. And so you just kind of have to take stock into that. And that doesn't make them less of a friend. You just know they're not going to be in that inner circle as you described earlier.
I got you. So how do we heal after all, when you've had that kind of conflict? You didn't have the Dr. Royster there to make sure that, like...
You can hire her, though.
You can. Okay. High five. I mean, because like, and I hate to say black people, I'm stigmatizing, I know, but I'm just trying to keep it real. Like, we just don't do that typically, or not yet. We're not there yet, maybe. So like, what do you do after you've had that blow up? You need to sit down and talk. But like, I could see, I learned from this experience that like, I need a third party, because if we had tried to have that conversation, this would have been done. So, and like, it was critical that there was another person there to help me hear and listen to what was being said. Like, what do we do if you're just a regular person?
As you build the muscle, you will be able to do it. I mean, as we said before, it's a muscle. So it's like any other muscle. When you first start using it and lifting and trying, you can't, you put that little weight thing on 0, right? And you're just barely trying to get some reps in, right? And then you tone it up, you strengthen it up, sound like I know a little something about it. But then that's how you go. But you can have third parties, as long as it's really hard to have a friend do it, but you can. It's just you have to be careful about who that friend is. You have to know that they know how to hold neutral, and you have to know that they are really capable, because it's real easy to jump on the side.
Be like, oh no, I'm on that side.
Right.
I'm on that side.
Right. But people can seek out third party support. Sometimes if you take a break, and then agree to come back at a mutual time, you can find a place and a time where you can start again and try to talk about it and try to get through it, and just take as many breaks as you can if you value the relationship. However long it takes you to get through it, even if it's a little bitty piece at a time, you can do that.
I would say that, the basis of any healthy relationship is psychological safety. So
What is that? You got to educate us.
Okay, so and I'm not a psychologist, but psychological safety is defined by me, at least right now, is me right now, is the level of comfort with which you feel with someone in order to really unpack and uncover some of those things to get even deeper into that relationship. And so I think sometimes we can conflate comfort with safety. And I think if we prioritize safety, then you can be uncomfortable, but know that, okay, what does that look like for us to have a conversation? And let's set, before we get into our feelings, let's each take a moment, write down what we were hurt by, write down what we would like to change about our interactions, and then come to some agreement before we come back together. And I think that is a way for you to kind of, I guess, design your own intervention if you don't have the wherewithal to hire a doctor.
Dr. Royster. Or Dr. Stanley.
Either way. So,
okay, all right. Now, what say you, Sasha?
Do you think that it's different with men? Like, how would we advise our men listeners of what that communication looks like, or if they have a conflict with another man? Do you ever think about, like, yo, I really didn't like what that dude just did? Like, do I talk about it? Do I address it? Or do I internalize it? Or do I, like, what do I do as a man?
Yeah, so that's a bit more difficult.
Is it really?
Because there's, we have so much nurture around what it's like to be a man in America if you're cisgender, and as opposed to being more fluid or anything like that. There's an expectation, and not only is it the story that we make up in our minds about how we are supposed to be. The should process. It becomes like, nah, if we can't make it work, maybe we're not here. And that's just one end of the spectrum. But I think one of the things that you have to be able to do is I would say to seek out someone who's a little older and wiser, and just be like, look, this, I'm really frustrated by this. And one of the things that we know is that anger is actually a secondary emotion because it's that hurt. That's the primary.
Okay.
But anger is safe to express.
Yeah.
Hurt, if you are a man in society and you care about that, it's harder to kind of unpack, to be like, I'm angry because I'm hurt.
I think that goes into, and I know I'm wrong, but I feel like that's part of the urban experience, even for women. Like, if you hood or whatever, I'm trying to be down here.
You're doing an incredible job.
Thank you. I'm trying. But no, I feel like I see that in like the urban, urban in quotes, communication style. Even with women, like, we don't say I'm hurt. We say I'm mad. That bitch. That this. That all this violence. And it's like, but you're really just hurt.
I think something that could help men is, I've seen this and observed this in a group of male friends that I have who are like this gives you hope for what men can be. Is that they oftentimes will pair a pleasurable activity. So they might go play golf or go play basketball. So they kind of get out some of that energy first. And it also creates that intimacy, because that's how men connect, is through physical activity.
Oh, really?
And then there's the space, that psychological safety, to ease into the conversation. They both exhausted, so they know they're not going to pop off on each other.
Hopefully not.
Right.
It's going to be a pitiful fight.
That's right. And then they might even laugh. But I've noticed that for men, doing a physical activity together, first it bonds them, it builds their intimacy, and then it can open a pathway where they can have some difficult conversations.
Are there any barriers that are unique to being like African American? Because only reason I ask that question is, like, I've seen in business how, like, I work with my dad a lot from a business perspective, or he's my investor. And one of the things, like, I noticed with some of my peers that are white, it's like, all of them work with their family. Like, it's like, oh, this is my cousin, this is my nephew. And then I consistently hear with black people, oh, don't work with your family, don't work with your friends. They'll kind of, that is one of the narratives I've always heard. And I've always been fearful of, honestly, because it's like, oh, we're going to have all these problems. But now, as I try to learn how to have positive conflict, it's like, is there any, it just seems like Black people, we like really are averse to conflict with each other. Like open conflict. We behind doors be like dog somebody and drag them and be totally comfortable with that. And then in person be like, hey, or I just avoid that person. Is that just me? Am I just observing that? No.
I mean, I think you have to clarify and say Black people in America.
Okay, Black people in America.
Because we have a unique experience that put us in this position of being pit against each other and being competitive with each other and not being really 100% sure if we can trust each other, right?
Yes.
Since the beginning of time, since we came over here, right? Okay. So we have that all as a foundation for our relationships that's just been coursing through our veins and our genes for 400 years.
Okay.
And so we can't just erase that overnight. So we don't have experience being cooperative.
And that's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
You said it the right way.
Yeah, we don't have experience being cooperative. We don't have experience. Our families haven't had the ability most of the time to pass on generational wealth. So it is a new experience for us. Somebody get 2 coins to rub together, they happy to give their baby one, but now they gonna make sure your baby don't get the other one, right? And that's a part of our American experience that has, I think, uniquely affected African Americans.
So where do we start then? If we're like, okay, we're at 0, how do we start to learn to build those cooperative relationships? What say y'all?
Well, I mean, I think it's part of the process is on a level of finding people that you can trust.
Okay.
Right? Because that's important. You can't trust everyone.
Right.
Right? And so being able to nurture those relationships with those close to you, because then you can practice how to be more open and vulnerable and find safety. So that's,
Yeah, I would. This is going to sound away, but there's a book called Change or Die, light reading actually, and the gentleman who wrote it, his name is Alan Deutschman, and he's a writer for Fast Company, and he talks about how real change comes from the 3 R's, and I want to build off of something you just said with regards to finding people who you can work with. And the first R is relating, like Alcoholics Anonymous, finding out who your tribe is, connecting with them intentionally connecting with them. And then the second R is repeating that. So making sure you do that over time. And then the last R is to reframe. And so whatever it is that you're working on, whatever it is that you're working through, now that you have spent intentional time meeting with people who are like-minded, and sometimes we get caught up in the whole, well, if you around people, you just gonna get in the echo chamber and you're not gonna, but you need that.
Yeah.
We're so used to not having that. That's actually in our DNA and our genetics. We were systemically removed from each other as family. And so we have to intentionally meet and rebuild. So we can break those cycles, and by finding that and then intentionally meeting over and over again, and then saying, okay, so how do we look at this from a different angle?
Okay.
Like, how do we turn this around? And what story, I'll go back to the story, what story will we make going forward? And that becomes your truth, because that's something that you have then lived.
I'm making notes over here. I'm like, change or die. Okay. Oh my goodness, because I'm finding even doing this show, like it's helping even how I'm having conversations like with my dad and my family, because we have a family business and investment interest together that typically like my dad just screams at everybody like, go to this, didn't I tell you this such and such and such and such, and like now I'm like, okay, now what exactly do you want me to do? Like, you done yelled at me for an hour. Okay, I'm sorry. Like, but no, like, it's so crazy because he's like, I don't know, sometimes I just get out of control. I was like, yo, you said, like, that is like massive for him to say, I get out of control. I don't know why. It's like, yo, you
let's unpack that.
Oh,
Right. That's the first start. That's the first part.
Tell me more.
Right. No, because I feel like we're at the basis point as Black people, because we just now able to have these type of conversations. Like, okay, so we read the book. Now we done got in an argument with our sister or our brother, right? Over family money, the things that make things, get crazy. Mama done died. What we gonna do? How, like, do we just need to go to the therapist and sit down because we don't have the skills to execute through that?
I mean, it's helpful, but I always tell my clients that this is a process, right? You're unlearning. I mean, historically, we're unlearning years, hundreds of years,
centuries,
right? And then in families, we're unlearning, family dynamics that were passed down, and so you're not going to do it perfectly.
Okay.
But I always think about like the awareness piece, like, so your dad's like, okay, sometimes I get out of control, I just yell at everybody. Good. That's a good start, right? Like as we were saying.
And I naturally want to be like, exactly. That's what I get out of control as well.
Because that's passed down,
Get it honest.
Exactly.
So when we talk about, mental health and how this impacts, how communication can impact our mental health, can Krystal and Dr. Krystal and Dr. Royster, can you speak to what does that look like mentally and how we may internalize it or how we may, externalize it? Like how do we work on that from a mental standpoint or recognize that in others?
Bring it home. Just like, okay.
The thing that, one of the things I wanted to say that I talk to people about, one of the benefits of learning how to communicate is so many people do what I call swallowing bombs, right? So there's a conflict or there's something you're feeling, and for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable telling someone, or you're afraid they will leave you, whatever the feeling is. And so you just swallow it and it explodes inside of you, right? And so that looks like you could have any number of physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, anxiety, right? So that manifests physically as well. And then it can show up in maybe you blowing up at your friend or partner because you've got this thing that you didn't address with them. And so tired, any number of symptoms that show up in people who are not communicating with other people, and it impacts relationships.
Yeah, and there is tons of scientific evidence at this point that shows that stress, psychological stress, emotional stress, is bad for your body. And people who live under stress that don't deal with their stress are more likely to have health issues. And then you can just keep going on and on and on from there. So it absolutely affects our bodies if we don't learn how to deal with these emotions. You can't swallow anything, even water, right? For an extended period of time without doing some damage and hurting yourself. And so if you think about the emotional bombs or the emotional damage that we don't address, that we don't deal with, we're hurting our own selves.
Absolutely.
Right? We're hurting our hearts, we're hurting our minds, we're hurting our arteries, we're hurting our kidneys. I mean, like, we are literally hurting ourselves if we don't learn to deal with our emotions.
Oh my goodness. And I can feel that because, like, I've had so many years where it's like, man, you start to feel sick being around somebody because it's like, I just don't want to deal with it or avoid it, And so it's like, how do I guess, like, it just starts when you just got to start dealing with stuff.
You got to start with someone safe, with something safe.
Okay.
It might be small, but the amount of relief you feel, and everybody has experienced this, where you weren't sure if you were over a hurdle with a person and you had a conflict, and when you realize that's resolved, you're like, phew. Like literally you've heard the phrase, a weight was lifted off my shoulders. That's very real description of how people feel when they deal with emotional stress. So everybody has somebody in their life that they can have a real conversation with.
That's true.
Even if it's a small conversation about a small thing, it's a start, and you just start working that muscle.
Just start working.
When is the right time to address something? Because I'll give you a few examples. Like, one, professionally at work, there's been moments where, like, we may oftentimes want to communicate something to someone, but we're not sure, if that's the best thing to do from a professional standpoint. But then personally, how do you decide, like, to let it go? Like, I know there's a person for my wedding, someone had moved my wedding cake. I know who moved my wedding cake.
I was in the wedding, so I'm like,
I never said anything because I was afraid that if I addressed the situation, I would have probably really hurt that person. Because
are you talking about when the cake fell?
Yeah, well, the cake started to topple over during the wedding, during the reception. And I was literally, so we had throne chairs, and I was literally sitting in the throne chair crying because I'm like, I've spent like $900 on this wedding cake, and it's toppling over. And to this day, I have yet to address that situation. And for the most part, I've kind of let it go. Like I don't think about it on a regular basis.
You ain't let that shit go.
Right.
You know you ain't let that shit go.
No, I did. Like
Ronnie over here laughing, Sasha.
No, you know what? Because this
feel
part,
the
like
emotion.
I've been around this person afterward.
Crystal's like, I can feel the emotion.
Yeah.
I want to, like, because I want to know, like, especially for a person like me who's more like I gotta get it out. But oftentimes, like, I will not get it out. But what do you advise people on, like, when is it time to address it? And when is it time to not? When it's like maybe what you need to address ain't got nothing to do with them. Maybe, like you said, it was a landmine. But I mean, like, is there a difference? Is there something that you should do when you're like, you know what? I think I should really try to discuss this, even if it's a difficult conversation. And how do we go about addressing those difficult conversations?
That's a great question.
I mean, I always say as soon as you're able. Because also the more time it gets away, like if you walked up to this friend now and started talking about the wedding cake, it would be quite confusing, right? Right? So as soon as you're able, meaning as soon as you are calmly, you have processed it, and you can really talk about your feelings, right? Because it's not about the cake, it's about whatever was behind, you know, the feeling of all of that, which we don't have to get into on the podcast.
Little therapy session real quick.
We can surmise.
Roll up. But I think as soon as you have processed your own feelings and you can calmly share your feelings and why that action hurt you, then that's time to have the conversation. And no sooner and no later, because if you do it later, it allows stuff to linger and rebuild.
Yeah. I'm going to go somewhere and come back, I promise. So I hope that it makes sense. So if you're familiar with the amazing singer and bassist, DC native Michelle Ndegeocello.
Oh, yes.
So she has an album called Bitter, which is ironically 20 years old this year. On that song, she has a song, on that album, she has a song called Loyalty. And the lyrics, a piece of that lyric says, trust only in change because hearts change, but betrayal always feels the same. And so when I take that lyric and I kind of pull that out, it's just like, this is a ripple effect from some earlier thing. And so every time that comes up, if it's not healed, if it's not dealt with, it's going to feel like that first time you felt betrayed, or whatever negative emotion is in there.
And it could be a betrayal that wasn't that person.
Exactly.
It could be like,
completely.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's what we've held on to. Yeah. That's how we've learned how to survive. And so we've learned that people who do X will eventually do
Y.
oh.
And so that is what comes up for us, and that's what becomes the trigger.
Okay.
And so we're responding with all those, whatever that time frame was, years of fury or whatever it is, and we're unloading on somebody because of what that echo was.
Okay. We're not going to let that happen again.
Yeah, we're not. And we're extremely defensive because now we know better. We may not have known better before. We may not have been in a position to do anything about it. There may have been a power gap, a dynamic between us and the other person before, but now we're at this moment. And so what I would also suggest is, just following off of what you already said, try to have that conversation as close to the incident as possible. And I always go with the 3 Ps: prepare, plan, and practice. Like, if you need to write down how you are feeling when you are at a low emotional triggering point, you are more likely to be clear-minded in what it is that you want to say, where it is actually coming from. You can do it in the mirror. You can do it with a friend who might know you, or not somebody objective third party, and just do that over and over again. And also, you might want to predict what you think the resistance might be too, so you can prepare yourself so you don't go off. Like, if they sit there, because if you in your mind imagine they're going to deny it. I know they're going to deny it. Then guess what? If you don't plan what you're going to do when they deny it,
then we're surprised. We're like, I can't believe she denied it.
And then you're like, you already knew. And you did this so you wouldn't go off, but yet you went off. And so it's just about how do you prepare as much as possible.
Let me look at these text messages.
Let me go back.
See the record right here.
It's on read receipt. Let's talk about it.
Screenshot it.
Exhibit A. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, Lord have mercy, we need y'all.
One thing I was going to say too, something I learned in a couples therapy training I did several years ago about how to approach a person about wanting to discuss a conflict was making an appointment. So this is from Imago couples therapy training, but saying, you know, so-and-so, I have a frustration that I want to discuss with you. Can you let me know when you might be available to talk about it? Because the theory is that you come at a person like, hey, I was really frustrated when you did whatever, and they're just not they're not ready, right? And so they're in protect mode because they don't know it's coming. This is just out of the blue. They weren't prepared. But if you say, hey, there's something I want to talk to you about that was frustrating, and you know, let me know when you have some time so we can discuss it. At least they're like, okay, this person is maybe a little upset, and they don't know maybe what you're talking about, but they're sort of ready. So that's something I think about too, rather than, you know, surprising someone.
But how does that differ with work? Like, because like
same, I think.
Is it the same? Like, I had a situation with this black woman that I work with. This is years ago, but like I could, and maybe this is my story. I could sense that she was threatened by me. Again, that's my story. I'm trying to process old tape, right? That was my old tape that I was addressing, that interacting with her. But I could just feel she had a problem with me. Like, I can't stand you, no matter what you do, what you say. And the lady, like, literally, it was just like every little thing I did was like a major issue. Like, oh, I'm gonna go tell the supervisor. I'm gonna go do it. I was like, yo, what is your goddamn problem? You know, and like I tried to have a sit down with this person and like, you know, okay, what is actually the issue? And she just wouldn't tell, like she just wouldn't be transparent about it. It was just like, well, I just, you know, like surface stuff. And it's like, no, we got a sister girl problem. We in a white office, but we got a sister girl problem. What the fuck is the problem? And she just wouldn't tell me. So like, how do you deal in that situation?
She may not have known.
Yeah, I would also say this. I think a lot of the resistance that comes up when you bring that up for people is they equate whatever criticism you're bringing to the identity that they hold about themselves and or their value system. And so one of the things that you can do to keep it as objective as possible is to talk about the observable behavior. Like, this happened. Okay. And this was, I cannot tell you what your intent was. Right. I don't know it. But I can tell you what your impact was on me. And so if you keep it focused and centered on what its impact is on you, it's not a matter of saying, well, you're a liar. Instead, I say, you know, well, something happened where something, you know, you said something that turned out not to be true. Tell me more about what that meant. Because I can tell you what it meant for me. It hurt me. I can't tell you know, and then it's about the behavior I'm defending what you really can't do that, but I'm defending the behavior. Instead of, if I say you're a liar, I'm immediately shut down. Defensive. Whether I am or not, I'm not going to own that. We're going to have a fight. Right. So if you want to preserve the relationship, keep it on the behavior.
I was going to say, too, sometimes it may be helpful to come at it from, like, the underbelly, like, you know, it's just the two of us in the office. I would like to have you as an ally. You know, what can we sort of like a, you know, I want to be close to you, or I want to have a working relationship. Like, what could we, you know, what could we do? Is there anything I can do?
Definitely.
Because then maybe it's not so like, you did this, you're not doing that.
Yeah, because I think then if you follow that with some observable behaviors, that can deflate the emotion, right? And then we can talk about, oh, okay, because we don't know what other people are thinking, feeling, going through, all of that kind of stuff. And people don't often realize how much that stuff impacts them when they deliver whatever it is they're delivering. So, you know, coming at it, I like the underbelly way, and then having some concrete, observable, you know, this is what I mean. Not, this is how, don't start out with how I felt. Like, this is just the behavior I'm talking about.
Don't start with this is how.
Because it's like, you made me feel. No, I don't make you anything, right?
And that's me. I'm like, no, that's you. But that can piss people off too. When you're like, no, you made me feel this way.
And that's the defensive, right?
Yes.
Then you get hit with a non-apology. So, I'm sorry, you feel that way.
Yes.
That's not an apology. And then you're like,
oh no, she didn't.
Now we're fighting.
I'm that person that once you tell me, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm like,
I can tell.
Has anybody ever been
I can see
soothed by that?
yeah.
Ronnie is over here cracking up, laughing. He's like, yep.
Done seen it.
Yeah.
He's like, that's about right. So what? Okay, so we done had an argument. We done did this
Used
this
our
conflict.
muscles, yeah.
Used our muscles, right? Okay, how do you apologize and forgive now as we close out this show? And we done seen a whole lot of black people forgiving this week, which is also very controversial. Another show topic. But, like, how do you? Because I mean, it sounds basic, but it's not something I know. For me, it's not a skill that I have a very strong skill at. You know, I worked in corporate like finance and M&A. You don't fucking apologize for shit. Like, it's a sign of weakness. You know, it's like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Like, but we want to get better. We want to be better people or have a better skill set. So then, how do we do that?
And I also see, and just as a piggyback to Starr, I'm the opposite. I'm the person, I get mad fast, but I forgive fast.
Do you?
And I apologize even faster. Like,
No,
you know, like I feel like I'm too quick to be like, oh, okay, well, I'm
Right, you
sorry.
haven't
Or
processed it
I'm
all.
too quick to just let it go.
And then you're not really apologizing. Then you're like, you still mad.
Well, no,
I'm
she's put
speaking
it
from
away.
What I do.
No,
And
right.
what I do is that I will like let stuff go, or I will apologize very quickly and really be sincere in, you know, hey, like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean this. And then I internalize that and think of it as a weakness, because I feel like, should I have even apologized? Should I have even acknowledged anything? Should I be letting it go? And so I battle that line where like, I feel as though like maybe I'm too open to conversating or trying to fix a situation where like maybe it shouldn't be.
Well, the thing that I think about when you talk about that is something I was going to share is I think, like, take your time, right? I think we think about these conversations as something like we're talking now, so we need to be able to wrap it up at the end.
Right.
But I'm a big fan of the circle back, right? Like, maybe I'm not quite ready to apologize or get your apology because I don't know, I'm not sure how I feel about it, about the new information I learned in this conversation. Maybe I need to go home and think about it. I'm an introvert, so I need some time to think about it, right? So give yourself time and agree that you can circle back and just sort of go from there. Like, take your time.
Because when, like, I'm an introvert, and so as I'm a performing introvert, but as an introvert, when someone is just like, oh, I'm sorry, it feels very disingenuous. And it's like, and an empath. Dr. Royce is laughing. That's the point of, like, pissing people off.
Turban on next week.
I am. It's like slowly the evolution, incense and all that.
Star 3000.
Like, but, like, so then it's like, okay, like, are you just doing that just to get through something, or just to be like, okay, we're over with? Like, because I don't process that fast, so I'm like, that's how, like, that's my story.
And I think that's the cultural imperative, right? Like, let's talk about it so we can get to the end and we're both sorry. And then maybe not, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
Especially as close relationships and depending on the severity of it. There's probably stuff y'all haven't talked about that's going to come up in that conversation.
Right.
So,
New stuff.
But I think that also comes from like a person who's like, if you like what I've known, and this is an assumption, is that most introverts that I know in my life typically hold on to things, like they're grudge holders. Whereas like with me being an extrovert,
Now I'm getting offended.
That's exactly what you don't do. You get defensive. You start.
Lulu's like, don't do that.
I'm an actually extrovert, but
I feel like that's part of being honest, though. Like when a person can be honest about, yo, I do hold on to stuff. Whereas like my husband is an introvert. He is the most grudge holding person. Other people that I know, my mother, people like that, my father, very much grudge holders. Whereas like me, like I'm more extroverted and we're expungers. Like we got to let it all out. And that's not always a good thing either. So I think like for me, when I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, it's really because in my mind, it's going so fast. Like I really may have not meant to do that thing. So I'm saying like, yo, like, I'm sorry. Like, whereas like a Starr saying, I never thought like an introvert may feel like, Like, I don't care that you're sorry, or I don't receive that. Whereas
not
for
ready.
me, I'm like,
Yeah.
nah, I'm really sorry. Like, my bad. Like, I really think about that.
So,
your
it's
energy
2
isn't
points.
telling.
Right. Two points as the professional introvert.
Okay.
In the room. So 2 points. One is if you're staying focused on yourself.
Okay. Okay.
Right, which is what we've been talking about, the self-awareness, the paying attention to what's happening in your body, what's making you feel a certain kind of way. That's going to make it easier to tolerate whatever you're trying to accomplish with the other person. And the other thing to clarify about introverts is it's not that we're holding a grudge. It's that we haven't processed it yet.
Yes.
Once we process it, we can let it go. That's why it's, as Starr said, a little bit more challenging when you process so quickly and you say you're over it.
Yeah.
We're like, wait, how is that even possible?
Right.
Like, have you really dissected
But that's
this?
why it's
Or
important
you
to
just-
stay focused on yourself. So if I process more slowly, I have to accept that you process quickly and you're done, but you have to accept that I process more slowly and I may need to circle back, right? It doesn't mean I'm holding on to a grudge. It means I'm still processing because in my introvertedness, I got to do all of that inside before I can bring it outside to you.
Yeah, and as
That's a great point.
as a fellow extrovert, I can tell you. So we talk to think, and introverts typically think to talk.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
Say that one more time because that's huge.
extroverts typically talk to think, and introverts typically think to talk.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I realize that's common, no matter whether you are an introvert or an extrovert, is everyone wants to feel heard, appreciated, and understood. And so even if you are an extrovert and you are having a conversation or a conflict with an introvert, or no matter who it is actually, you want to make sure that you acknowledge. I try to make eye contact if you need to display active listening, to repeat back what you heard them say.
Okay.
Acknowledge that whatever you did hurt them, and then just apologize. Like, look, that wasn't my intent. I sincerely apologize. I hope that you can forgive me. That's unlike me typically. I know this might take you some time. If it does, I'll be okay with that. But I really am sorry.
Yeah.
And then when the extrovert walks away, the introvert can you can do whatever
take all of that
checklist
process,
and
yeah.
process it, and you give them that space,
Yeah.
and that's the important part too. Like, there's holding the space, and then there's giving the space, and
You
learning to
should
be
write
okay
that
with
out
that.
and
What's
put
the
on a little
difference?
pocket card to help people
What's
out.
the difference though, holding the space and giving the space? What's the difference?
So for holding the space would be if we're like together, and if we are committed to staying where we are right now. If we have conflict, we're committed to staying where we are right now until we resolve it. Then, and I've had to learn how to be comfortable with silence as an extrovert and as a coach. And so I just sit there and be like, I'll be here until you're done. I'm sitting in it with you. And so, and that's the empathy. That's the empathy component there. But if you say, I need a moment, and I think that means that we don't need to contact each other until I finish processing, then even though inside I'm like, well, what do you mean? You don't forgive me immediately? Like, what's going on? Like, I have to temper that back and say, you take all the time that you need, because then that shows that I respect you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not having an expectation of you to be like, but when I apologize, you need to accept it. Like, why aren't you accepting it? Just be like, I'm gonna give you your space. And just be like, I hope they forgive me. If they don't, then I can learn to be okay with that as well.
This was good. You ready to wrap this up, Miss Sasha?
I'm ready. Dr. Krystal, you have any last words that you want to add before we wrap up?
I mean, I guess the biggest is take some time to do some personal reflection, whether that's with a professional, whether it's with a close friend, a clergy member, whoever you're comfortable with, because that is, I say, the basis of having fulfilling relationships. So.
All right.
Olu?
Just learn to deepen your awareness, to do the work for yourself. That's the only person or the only thing that you can control in this universe is your own reasoned choice. You can't control anything or anyone else. As the father of a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, I can tell you, no matter how small they are, you can't control anybody else. So if you do that first and you do that work, then you'll find your relationships will spin off from there at a much greater height.
Yeah, and I'm gonna triple echo the self-awareness, because you can't do any of the other steps, right? If you haven't been aware of yourself, you can't reframe, you can't hold the space, you can't do any of those things if you haven't sat with yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to go to a therapist. I mean, of course, I love therapy. I do it all the time.
Right.
But you can work on yourself with yourself.
Yes.
We just have to be committed to it.
How do you do that?
If you need structure, there are workbooks, there are apps. There are lots of free ways that you can work on yourself. Don't use money as an excuse to stay ratchet.
I ain't
Put
got my
that on a card. I want a poster now.
Who's doing that one? I need you to do that.
So there are plenty in today's world, plenty of ways to work on yourself. And so take advantage of those, because you can't improve your relationships with other people until you've done some work on yourself.
Absolutely.
I don't really have, I mean, I'm just sitting here taking notes and learning. I think my wrap up is, find some experts, because y'all done just poured into me. Like, okay, I got more work to do. I'm not done yet.
Nobody is done.
Nobody is ever done.
I'm not done yet.
Nobody is done.
As my therapist would say, well, you're not going to be done.
No.
I was like, no, I feel like I'm done now.
Okay.
I'd be like, no, you're not.
But you're not.
I'm not even close. So this was, I mean, honestly, for
Sasha?
me, I'm like, wow, thank y'all. That's all I got.
Thank you.
I'm kind of similar to Starr. It was more reflective thinking about it, and being in the moment of hearing where are the things that I can continuously try to do better and understand, and again, like understand myself. And I think that's a big thing that we often don't do when we're communicating with others, is that we don't even understand how we're communicating with ourselves. And I think once we start doing that more, we will do better at communicating with others. But I'm happy to just hear, even like with the whole introvert comment, like it's so hard sometimes to understand that we process differently, like people just do, and accepting that and being able to give reciprocity, because I want someone to understand me just as much as I want to understand them. So Starr, tell us where they can find us, what we got going on, and then we're going to close out.
All right. So you can find us on our website at Amerikan Therapy. That's American spelled with a K. Yes, we know it's not spelled correctly. AmerikanTherapy.com. Ooh, or is it? I like that. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up. We are getting ready to go to Tennessee State, y'all. October 10th, right? I got the dates right, correct, Sasha?
Right, October 10th.
So October 10th, we're going to Tennessee State to kick off our Black Mental Health Conference, our tour, actually. We're going to, I believe, 9 HBCUs so far. So all this October, November, and all next semester, we're going to hit a whole bunch of schools. So we are coming to you guys. If you want us to come to your school, email us at americantherapy@gmail.com and get in touch with us, and we'll make it happen. And again, if you like the show, if you want a topic to come up on the show that you want to discuss, americantherapy@gmail.com. Email us, let us know. We love to hear from folks that listen to the show. Eventually, we may try to have a call-in show at some point. I don't think we're there yet. and we're on the gram, right, Sasha?
Yep, we're on the gram, Amerikan Therapy, as Starr mentioned, with a K. And so you can find us there, follow us, like us, and then we're on all platforms. So make sure you like us and leave a great review.
5 stars.
And we out.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Did y'all have fun?
I really did.
Yeah, I can still hear.
She over here like, does Dr. Krystal take Blue Cross Blue Shield?
My practice does. So we take insurance. Yes.
She's like, yes.
Short version, yes.
Oh my goodness.
But I don't see clients. So.
Oh, you don't see clients anymore? Oh.
I do, but these are people I've been seeing for years.
I got you.
So, yeah.
But you've got a whole bunch of therapists, right?
Yeah, we have like 30. So.
30?
Yeah.
Go ahead, girl. Checks, girl. Checks.
It's more expensive to run a business than one might think.
Yeah. I was
Like,
gonna
I
say.
make $2 million and I ain't got but $100,000. This don't make no damn sense. I got less money than when I was working for sorry. Oh, so she can see y'all. She was like, they were great.
That was a lot of fun. It's my first podcast.
Thank you.
Very,
Yeah,
very
thank
good.
you. I'm glad it worked out.
No, definitely. So we need speakers for the tour. So